So whenever I hear that story, I can't help but be drawn to the last part. It sounds very un-Jesus-y to me. Right? You hear that story, and then at the end, it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? We'll get there. But first, I want to begin by asking you a few questions. So they're not rhetorical. So when I ask you a question, if you have a response, if something comes to your mind, I'd love for you to answer and interact with me. And it should be easy. There's something for everyone. So, if I were to ask you, who is the most gifted or talented athlete that you know, who would that be? No jealousy this morning. Who would be, when you think of the greatest athlete, who would you think of? Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, Roger Federer, Babe Ruth, Roger Staubach. Yeah, so those are all good. When I think of athletes, I think about a guy who just looks like he is sculpted. LeBron James, he's not necessarily my favorite player, but when I think of like great athletes, this guy comes to mind. One of the others of you had spoken it out, but maybe even greater than LeBron James is Serena Williams. She is and has been dominant for a very, very long time in her sport. She owns it. We probably all have our biases when asked those questions, just depending on who we like or don't like. But the question is, who is the most gifted or talented athlete that you know? All right, how about this one? Who's the most creative thinker that you know? This one maybe is a little bit more difficult. Socrates, Einstein, Steve Jobs. Yeah, our minds will go to where we feel like creativity is birthed. And in some places, those would be entrepreneurs, or they would be inventors, or maybe artists and musicians. Okay, creative mind. I think of Elon Musk. This guy is doing some incredible things, and each thing that he does is so different than the thing before it. He's really creative. Whatever you think about Elon Musk, he has a very creative mind. What about musicians? Who's the most talented musician you know, Ryan?
The Boss.
The Boss. You have to say that. We're in New Jersey, right? With and without bias. This is clearly a matter of taste. There is no greater in my mind than this guy. So when you're thinking about the questions that I'm asking you, I just want you to just consider not only who it is that you think is the most gifted or talented, but why it is that you think so. Okay? Next category, who do you think would be the most compassionate, caregiving person you know? That's awful nice. Your mom, yeah. Yeah, my mind kind of goes here. I know a lot of people who are incredibly compassionate. And Mother Teresa may or may not be at the top, but she certainly comes to mind when I'm thinking about people who really give their life away for the sake and benefit of others. Yeah, I think so. All right, last question. How about who is the most gifted or talented leader that you know? Ha ha ha. Come on, you can think better than that. Who's the most talented leader that you know? So maybe we go to military, maybe we go to presidential, maybe we go to business, maybe we go, who knows where we go? I tend to go here. What's going on with you people? So I'm not going to leave him up because that's going to really distract us for the rest of the time. No commentary or editing. Some of you guys know who that was. Others don't. It doesn't really matter. We'll move on. But here's what I want you to think about with all of the questions that I ask you. Of all of the people in each of the categories, how do you think they got that way? How do you think they became so athletic? How do you think they became so creative? How do you think they became such good leaders? How do you think they became so compassionate, so musically gifted? How do you think they got that way? There are two reasons that each of those people got the way that they are. Number one, they were given a gift by God. I can be as devoted and committed and practice as hard as I want, and I will never be as athletic as LeBron James. Ever. So we know that each of them, we trust that each of them were gifted. But they didn't sit on their gifts. The reason we know their names is because they worked hard. They were committed, devoted, given to developing what God had given them. And so this resonates with the story that Susan just read. In the story, in Matthew chapter 25, there are three people who are entrusted with talents or gifts. Two of them take what they're given and do something with it, and the other one, the third, digs a hole and buries it. And we're going to get to each of the three and why they did what they did and what that means to you and me in just a moment. But I just need you to know that in the story, as well as in this room, there are no zero talent people. Every single person has a talent. Now, some may have more than others. That is true. But every single one of them and every single one of you has a talent. And maybe many. God gave you that. And it is important as you reflect on what God gave you that you do something with it. Because at the end of the day, the Lord of the gift is the Lord of the settled account. And one day, God's going to want to have a conversation with you about what you did with what He gave you. And I want you to think about that. Now, as in any good story, the context is important for understanding it completely. Now, when Susan read you this story, she opened her Bible and she said this comes from Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30, and that is true. But what you may not know is this is context. This is among Jesus' last teachings. This story is the middle story of three consecutive that He teaches, all of them on the end of the age and on the things to come. This is the middle story. In 2 days, Jesus will be hanging on a cross. Why does this matter? Because when He tells this story, He tells it not to the crowds, but to His disciples. He tells it to His closest friends. This context is really important. So when He tells this story to His closest friends, you might imagine, if it were you, that there would be a great sense of urgency in trying to communicate to your closest friends if you only had 2 days left to live. Think about it. Your closest friends have serious questions. You have 2 days left to answer them. The energy behind the stories is filled with urgency. So this is the second. The first story is the story of the bridesmaids, the 10 bridesmaids. 5 light their lamps and are ready, 5 are not. When it comes time for the bridegroom to return, some are out of luck and some are ready, right? This is a parable or a story of readiness as they move to the end of the age. The story on the other side of our story this morning is the parable of the sheep and the goats. Again, all three are end of the age stories. So, for this one, for this morning, Jesus tells His closest friends with only 2 days left a story about a master who goes on a very long trip. Now, when they're hearing this story, they will know that as a part of their common culture in the first century, this is not unusual. Oftentimes, when landowners, people who possessed great treasures or properties, when they would go on trips, they would entrust what they had to their most trusted servants. Why? Because travel in that day was dangerous, and oftentimes when they left, they didn't know whether they would be coming back. And so before they left, they would give what they had to the people that they trusted the most to take and care for it and nurture it and grow it. In this story, there are 3 servants. One with 5 talents, one with 2 talents, and one with 1. Now, in the version that Susan read, she read bags of gold. In some of the other versions, they will say bags of silver. But in the original Greek, the word is talent. And why I say that is for this reason. 1 talent equals 10,000 denarii. 1 denarii is the common day's wage for a worker of that day. So when you think about the 5 and the 2 and the 1, you need to know that it would take 15 to 20 years for a common laborer to earn the kind of money that was entrusted to them by the servant. Just 1. 15 to 20 years to earn 10,000 denarii, which equaled 1 talent. So all of these 3 servants are given the opportunity of a lifetime. It's not just like he flicked them a quarter and said, good luck and God bless. He gave them a lot, whether they had 1, 2, or 5. He goes away for a very long time, and immediately the one who has 5 puts his 5 to work and he multiplies it. The guy with 2 does the same thing. The guy with 1 doesn't want to be bothered. He goes and digs a hole and hides the money, the talent. And then, as the story goes, after a long time, the master comes back and there is an accounting. First, he meets with the guy who he gave 5. Now, in the story, just backing up just a second, it said that he gave them 5, 2, and 1 according to what? According to their abilities. In this story, he's not going to expect the one he gave 1 to the exact same thing that he gave 2 to and 5 to. And this is really important for you and I, because God's never going to expect you to be me and me to be you. He's never going to expect you to be LeBron James or Serena Williams. He's never going to expect you to be anybody else. He's just going to expect, based on your abilities that He gave you, to do your best. And so, when he comes and he begins to have sort of an interview, an exit interview, if you will, he sits down with the one who had 5, and the one who has 5 says, hey, you left, and as soon as you left, I went right to work, and here's what I have. And he gives him double the amount. Now, the master is happy. Why is the master happy? Is the master happy because he has doubled the amount? Is that the reason that it says he's happy? Why is he happy? Because the servant was faithful to what he had been given. And because he was faithful, the master invites him to enter his joy. Come, celebrate. Let's enjoy what you've done with what I gave you. It wasn't about how much, it was about his faithfulness. Right? Side note, if you want to enter into the joy of your master, commit yourself to being faithful to what he's given you. Don't compare yourself to other people. Don't complain about what you don't have. Be faithful to what he's given you. And the Scriptures teach us that we will enter in to the joy of our master. Guy with 5 comes, welcome, enter into my joy. Guy with 2, same thing. Won't go into details because it's basically the exact same thing, right? The 3rd guy comes. And this is the part in the very beginning where we're drawn like a magnet in this story. Because this part seems so harsh. It seems so difficult, right? Now here's what I want. This is where the context is important. Last week we were talking about the parable of the great banquet. And I said that Jesus would oftentimes use hyperbole, which is exaggeration, right? Right? When you're inviting people to a banquet, don't invite your family, friends, neighbors, anybody who has anything that can give you anything back. Was he literal in that? No, he wasn't literal in that, right? You would never host something and not include people that you loved. He was challenging them to go beyond so that they could expand their circle and invite in people that they hadn't loved. He wanted a bigger banquet, right? Sometimes when we hear stories, we are shocked by details of the story, but we miss the point. I think Jesus is intentionally being shocking here. I think that's his purpose. It makes us take note when we hear the end of that. It's like, whoa, right? So he has this conversation with this 3rd servant, and the 3rd servant begins, he asks him, okay, I left you with 1, what do you have for me? And he comes and he brings this dirty bag, dirt's, falling off of it, and he puts it on the table. And he's like, you know what? I know you're a hard guy. And I knew that you are unfair in the way that you manage your estate. So I was afraid. And so instead of trying to take it and make something on it, I just thought my safest bet would just be to dig a hole and go bury it. And then when and if you came back, I'd dig it back up and give you what you gave me. The basic problem for this servant is that he has a very distorted image of his master. And his distorted image of his master causes him to live in fear. And his fear causes him to make awful decisions with his life. And he gets to this place where now he has to give an account for what he's done, and all he does is make excuses. I mean, seriously, if he was that afraid of his master, he could at least gone and taken and put it in the bank and gained a little bit of interest. Right? He did nothing. His master said, I'm giving you the opportunity of a lifetime, and he goes and digs a hole and buries it. He sits on it. And he's brought into a place of accounting for it. I think the point, right, the details of it shock us, but I think the point is this. What you do with what you've been given is a matter of life and death. Now, some of you don't think so because you're comparing yourself to other people. You think that what you have isn't enough. You think that you got the short end of the stick somehow. You're not as bright, you're not as creative, you're not as athletic, you're not as gifted in your leadership, you're not whatever. And so you go through your life every day waking up, same thing, just rote. Same thing, day after day after day, and you've just kind of checked out. You're not really grateful for what you do have, and you're not really doing much with it. You're doing maybe the bare minimum. And Jesus, with 2 days to go among his closest friends, is saying, time is of the essence. This is an urgent matter. The kingdom of God is at stake, and what you do with your life is a matter of life and death. It's not only going to impact you, it's going to impact everybody else around you. So stop comparing yourself and stop making excuses and stop living in fear and stop burying what you have and start identifying and recognizing that what I've given you is great. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and it is up to you to develop that, to nurture that. And you need to hear that this morning. You need to understand that the Master can take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed a multitude. Our Master, he is incredibly resourceful. He can take a widow who with her 2 mites given into an offering and use it as the lead gift in a capital campaign. You don't have to have a lot to do something with it. But at the end of the day, the Lord of the gift will be the Lord of the settled account. It doesn't come from a place of hatred. It comes from a place of love. God has deposited into each of us so many gifts and talents that He wants distributed. Why? He blesses so that we become a blessing. And when we hoard that, and when we hide that, and when we refuse that, everybody loses. So let's circle back to the beginning. Who's the greatest athlete you know? Who's the most creative person you know? Who is the most compassionate person that you know? Who are these people and how did they get that way? The only reason that we know the names you spoke is because they received a gift that they did something with. And maybe, just maybe, when you find yourself a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, and somebody asks you a question like that, or somebody asks somebody that knows you, maybe you're going to be the answer to that question if you take seriously what you're listening to today. There is an urgency in Jesus' voice. He's not talking to people who don't know Him, who are separated from God and His kingdom. He's talking to people who are all in, who've given up everything they had to be a part of His posse. And what He's saying to them is, look, I got very little time left. This is an issue of life and death for you. Take what I've given you. Take all that I've given you and deploy it for the sake of my kingdom. Take your blessings and be a blessing. Be faithful. Because if you're faithful with whatever I give you, I can promise you there's an invitation to enter my joy. Don't be on the outside looking in, sad about what you don't have, living in darkness, in fear, in shame. Stop burying what you have. Stop making excuses. And start living your life to the full. And that, I believe, is what Jesus was getting at. Don't let the harshness of the details and the urgency of His message cause you to miss the point. What you do with what your Master has given you is a matter of life and death. And I think that's what He wants you to know. Let's pray. Lord, I thank You that You do care what we do with our lives. I thank You that You're not the kind of Master who would just be ambivalent. I thank You that it matters, that our lives, each of them, matter, and what we do with them is of supreme importance. I thank You that it all matters to You. And I thank You that from a place of love, that You will converse with us one day about what You've given us. And so from this moment forward, if we haven't already, I pray that we would move from fear to a place of trust. I pray that we would move from ignorance and distortion to clarity. And I pray that as we do, that we would just learn to be faithful, and that along the way we would receive the joy that is available to us at every moment along the way. Whatever it is that each of us needed to hear this morning, I pray that we did. Would You continue to prompt us and speak to us and help us as we consider Matthew 25 as it relates to our own lives, as we move from this place to the next and the one after that. In Christ we pray. Amen. Just as a side note before we go. And in 5 or 10 minutes, for those of you who can stay, we're going to have a 30-minute meeting. We're going to be talking about our second service and some other significant things that are coming up, if you can stay. But here's what I wanted to say. As we move towards new adventures in the life of this fellowship, we move out of summer and back into the fall, and we go to second service. There's going to be opportunities for some of you guys to step in and use some of the talents that God has given you. You know, when I think about a lot of the things that make actually a Sunday morning experience happen, there are a lot of people who actually make it work, from the people who are, you know, greeting you as you come in the building, who are helping you to find your seat, from those who are in places where they're monitoring our security, they're in the welcome center, those people who are setting up and creating a spread for you to receive from, snacks, drinks, where you can connect with others, our musicians, our vocalists, our children's workers and teachers, our youth. It takes a lot of people to sort of make a Sunday morning experience happen. And when we go to 2, we're going to have to double. For all intents and purposes, we're going to have to double the amount of people that we have. Now, there are some people who are going to make sacrifices, and they're going to pull double duty for a little while. But I know that sometimes you come in and maybe you don't even think about it just because all these things are done. But like it does take people, and it does take commitment to make things happen. And so, I don't know, as you think about maybe what talents God's given you, sometimes you think, all right, well, I'm not musical, I can't do that, or I can't really cook, I don't do that very well, I don't teach, I don't really like kids, you know, I mean, whatever. But each of you were created with different talents and abilities. And even if you're not really a covenant missionary or a member at Grace, but you've been coming here, you know, I mean, even the people in the back who do the sound and the PowerPoint, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. If you, as we move towards this September 22nd, if you're not engaged in a way where maybe you're utilizing your talents, at least here, this goes for way beyond just this church. I mean, the message was really about your life. But just as it relates to this church, we would love for you to really just check in with us and say, you know what, here's some things that I think I could contribute. And if you need that, I'm willing once a month, or, you know, every couple of weeks or whatever, we could have the conversation. So I just hope in the weeks to come, if that applies to you and maybe you have a gift or a talent to share, that you would contact us at the office, either via email or telephone, or just stop me or one of our elders here in the next several weeks, and we would be glad to help you find a right fit. Because I think there's a mutuality in terms of our needing you and you needing us. I think there's just a nice blend, and I think when you serve and use your gifts and talents, you will find great fulfillment and joy out of it. So we don't want to put a square peg in a round hole just because we have a need, but like if your talent or gift matches a need that we have, we love to have further conversations. So I just want to say that to you. Please just think and pray about that, because as we grow, we really want to grow with you and utilize what God has given you. So that being said, please stand. I am always so grateful and blessed to be here with you. I pray that as our summer is very quickly fleeting, that you enjoy what remains of the day. Have a great week, and always be people of grace and peace. God bless you guys.